The creak of the old floorboards under my feet is a sound I know better than the sound of my own children's voices. It's been with me all these years, a faithful companion, as constant as the changing seasons outside my window. It was there at 4 in the morning, before the first hint of dawn dared touch the dusty glass, as I'd stand in the kitchen, drinking scalding black coffee, getting ready for a shift. That creak was there to greet me when I'd drag my bone-tired body home late at night, smelling of what my family now calls that specific atmosphere. The scent of machine oil, ozone from a shorted wire, and cheap tobacco. It was a witness to me tiptoeing past the kids' rooms, careful not to wake them or my wife, Martha, to eat a cold dinner alone. That sound is the soundtrack to a life built on duty and calloused hands. And today, in the deafening emptiness of this house, it sounds especially sharp, as if it's crying out for everything that's been lost. My name is Sam, Samuel Allen to be exact, but nobody's called me that in years. I'm 70. For the better part of my life, I was an electrician. The faded lettering on the door of my old beat-up Ford F-150, rusting away in the garage for the last decade, used to read Allen & Son Electrical. The son part never happened, though. My boy, David, always thought working with your hands was beneath him. Before I ever held a pair of lineman's pliers, I held an M16 in the jungles of Vietnam. That's a chapter of my life I buried deep, and I don't like digging up old graves. After that, my life was simple, as straightforward as running a wire from a pole to a house. Work, family, duty. I believed in the unspoken code of my generation. You work an honest day. You aren't afraid to get your hands dirty. You rise with the sun and you don't complain. You provide. I believed that if your conscience was clean and your hands were calloused, you'd earn yourself a little peace and respect at the end of the road. I believed it when I built this house, board by board, with my own 2 hands. I believed it when Martha and I raised our 2 kids, David and Sarah, going without so they could have everything. I thought I had earned the right to a quiet, dignified old age, right here on this back porch, in this old rocking chair, with a cup of that same strong coffee, watching the sun set behind the oak trees. I was a damn fool. Hey friends, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so this story can be heard by as many people as possible. Let me know what city you're watching from. Today is Sunday, a day that used to be filled with noise, laughter, and chaos. The smell of Martha's apple pie would fill the house, mingling with the scent of roast chicken. The kids' voices would echo through the halls, arguing, laughing, living. The house was alive. Now, Sunday is the hardest day of the week. The silence is a physical weight. It presses on my eardrums and creeps into my soul like a cold fog. The kids. They visit less and less. They're different people now, successful, important. They live in their brand new, sterile houses in fancy suburbs, the kind of places that smell like freshly cut grass and expensive scented candles labeled sandalwood and bergamot. Not the honest smell of a man's labor. And every one of their rare visits has become a kind of torture for me, a quiet, soul-crushing humiliation. A month ago, I turned 70. The big 7-0. A milestone, I guess. And in my foolishness, I was looking forward to their visit. I prepared. I spent the morning cleaning up, my old bones groaning with every movement. It wasn't their kind of clean, of course. My kind of clean is when the tools are back in their place and there are no muddy boot prints on the floor. I even dusted off the pictures on the mantelpiece, their frames tarnished with age. There was Martha and me on our wedding day. She was so beautiful in her simple white dress, her eyes shining with a light I haven't seen in this world for a long, long time. There I was, holding a tiny bundled David, with Sarah standing beside me, all pigtails, and missing front teeth. I stared at those faces from the past and couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it all went so wrong. I decided to bake Martha's apple pie. It was a fool's errand, really. My thick, clumsy fingers struggled with the delicate crust, but I wanted the house to smell the way it used to. I wanted to bring back a piece of that time, just for an afternoon. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples did, for a little while, overpower the ghosts of old smells baked into the walls. I put on my one good shirt, the one I saved for funerals and holidays, and sat in my armchair by the window, watching the driveway. I waited for them, like a faithful old dog, waiting for a master who has long since forgotten him. They arrived in their shiny, soulless vehicles that look more like spaceships than cars. David and his wife, Jessica, in her pearl-white SUV. Then Sarah and her husband, Mark, in his silver sedan. The grandkids, Jake and Emily, tumbled out, their faces buried in their phones. They tossed a quick, "Hey, Grandpa," over their shoulders and immediately disappeared back into their digital worlds. No hugs, not even a real smile, just a perfunctory greeting. They stepped inside, and I saw it instantly. That involuntary, gut reaction on their faces. First, a flicker of confusion as their eyes adjusted to the dim light of the old house. Then, a poorly concealed look of disgust, quickly masked by tight, phony smiles. Jessica, my son's wife, a perfect specimen of suburban perfection with her salon hair and flawless nails, wrinkled her perfect nose as if she'd smelled something foul. "Sam, darling, happy birthday," she chirped, her voice as cheerful and cold as a winter morning. She handed me a large, elegantly wrapped box. "We brought you something special. It's the latest ionic air purifier. It will help with the specific atmosphere in here." A specific atmosphere. She said it as if she were talking about mold or dead possum under the floorboards. David, my son, my firstborn, the boy whose diapers I changed and whose scraped knees I bandaged, just coughed awkwardly. He stood there, shifting his weight from one expensive loafer to the other, looking entirely out of place on my worn, scuffed floors. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He didn't say a word. Not one damn word in my defense. His silence was his signature on her indictment. "Dad, don't be like that. She's just worried about your health," Sarah chimed in, always the peacemaker. "At your age, it's important to have fresh, clean air." Fresh, clean air. They spoke as if I were living in a coal mine. This specific atmosphere, this smell on which they choked, was the very price of their clean air. It was the concentrated essence of thousands of hours I'd spent in damp basements and sweltering attics, wrestling with live wires so the lights would always stay on in their perfect lives. It was the smell of grease from the old generator in the garage I used to rebuild on nights and weekends to earn the extra cash for their college funds. And of course, it was the smell of coffee. Strong, black, and cheap. The only fuel that kept my engine running for 40 years. This smell wasn't a problem to be purified. It was the invisible foundation they had built their shiny lives upon. But they didn't see that. Or worse, they chose not to. The rest of the evening, I sat at my own dining room table, feeling like a stranger. A ghost at my own birthday party. They talked about things that were a foreign language to me. Stock options, corporate restructuring, David's big promotion at his consulting firm, Sarah's plan to trade in her car for an even more expensive one, their upcoming winter vacation to the Bahamas. Their world was woven from brand names, credit scores, and social media posts. My world was built from copper wire, electrical tape, sweat, and a sense of duty. Those two worlds had drifted so far apart that a bridge could no longer span the chasm. I looked at their hands resting on the clean tablecloth. Smooth, soft, manicured. Not a single callus. Not a speck of grease under the fingernails. Not one faded scar from a slipped screwdriver or the sharp edge of a junction box. Then I'd look down at my own, gnarled, arthritic knuckles that ached in the morning. Skin like old, cracked leather, a roadmap of white scars and dark age spots. The hands that had built this house. The hands that had rocked their cradles. The hands that had silently, without a word of complaint, paid for their future. The final crushing blow came when it was time for dessert. I went to the kitchen to get the pie I had baked with such foolish hope. The living room door was ajar, and I heard Jessica's voice, a low, venomous whisper. "David, I can't. I just can't," she hissed. "This house. It's depressing. It's suffocating. And that smell. God, how does he live like this? We have to do something. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? What if one of our friends, what if one of your partners from the firm ever found out your father lives in a place like this?" I froze, leaning my shoulder against the cool wall. The air left my lungs. My heart seized up, a cold, tight fist in my chest. I could have taken indifference. I could have taken neglect, but embarrassing? That word was a knife in the gut. "I know, honey, I know," David answered, his voice weary and annoyed. "I told you. I'll talk to him. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can convince him to move into assisted living. There are some really nice places. It would be better for everyone. And this property, it's a gold mine. We sell it. We solve a lot of problems." I didn't hear any more. Like a thief in my own house, I backed away, my soft-soled slippers making no sound on the floorboards that knew my every secret. I walked back into the living room, my face a mask I couldn't feel. I put the pie on the table and announced I was feeling tired, that I was going to turn in early. Their relief was palpable. They bustled about, gathering their things, leaving a pile of expensive, useless gifts on the table, offerings to their guilty consciences, the air purifier, a digital blood pressure cuff that synced to a smartphone, a cashmere blanket that cost more than I used to make in a week. When the last car pulled away and the sound of its engine faded down the road, I was left alone, in a silence that was louder than any noise. The house felt like a vast, empty tomb. My eyes fell on the box containing the air purifier, a specific atmosphere. I walked over to my old workbench in the corner of the living room. I picked up a familiar, greasy can of 3-in-1 oil. I unscrewed the cap, and I took a long, deep breath. That sharp, chemical smell was more honest than any word they had spoken all day. I went out to the back porch and sank into my rocking chair. Darkness had fallen. A cold wind chased dry leaves across the yard. The steady creak of the chair was the only sound in the world, and a bitter, ironic thought echoed in my head. If I'd known I'd end up as a ghost at my own family reunion, an embarrassment to my own kids, I'd have bought myself a fishing boat instead of paying for their new houses. I had been silent for 40 years. I had swallowed my pride, swallowed their indifference, swallowed it all. But you can only swallow so much before you either choke or you spit it back out. And in that moment, under the cold, distant stars, something inside me didn't just break. Something new, something hard and cold, began to form in its place. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just hurt. It was a cold, clear, unforgiving realization that the bridge I had spent my life building to my children had been dynamited, and I wasn't the one holding the plunger. The night was a long and sleepless one. I sat in the dark kitchen, the coffee in my mug turning cold, as the past I had kept locked away for decades broke through the dam. The memories weren't faded pictures. They were vivid, visceral, and they flooded me with the full force of their reality. 4:15 a.m. A bitter cold. February morning in 1985. The frost on the inside of the window pane glitters in the moonlight. The alarm clock is still silent, but my body knows. It's time. Martha is asleep beside me, a soft, steady rhythm to her breathing. In their rooms, 10-year-old David and 6-year-old Sarah are lost in dreams. I move through the silent house on stockinged feet, trying not to wake the creaking floorboards. In the kitchen, I spoon instant coffee into a mug. The kettle whistles, a lonely sound in the dark. I drink the scalding, bitter liquid, my only breakfast. My dinner, if I'm lucky, is 14 hours away. I'm working 2 jobs. The day shift is with the city power company, but that paycheck barely covers the mortgage and the groceries. So after my shift, I do side work. Moonlighting, we called it. David needs a new bike. He's shot up like a weed, and his old one is a wreck. Sarah's just been diagnosed with asthma, and the inhalers the insurance won't cover cost a fortune. Martha is sitting up late again, mending the seams on her only decent pair of shoes. I cannot fail them. I will not. Outside, the cold bites at my face. My old Ford F-150, my trusted workhorse, is covered in a layer of frost. The cab smells like me: gasoline, motor oil, and cheap tobacco. The engine groans and complains, but finally turns over. I pull out onto the empty, silent streets of our small town. The houses are all dark. I'm one of the men who wakes the city up. My first call is an emergency repair at the downtown diner. Their main oven is out. If I don't get it fixed in the next 2 hours, there'll be no fresh bread or biscuits for the breakfast rush. As I drive, I think about my own kids eating warm toast for breakfast, and the thought makes the weight on my shoulders a little lighter. I'll work a 12-hour day for the city, then drive straight across town to replace a faulty meter for old Mrs. Henderson. She'll pay me $20 in cash. That's 1 week's worth of Sarah's inhaler. I don't feel tired. I feel a dull, constant pressure of responsibility. It never lets up. A sweltering summer day in 1993. David got into a good college, out of state. We're sitting around this very kitchen table. The official acceptance letter lies in the center. Martha is crying tears of pride. David is glowing, tasting the freedom of a future he can't wait to start. I'm glowing right along with them. But deep inside, a cold, hard knot of fear is tightening in my stomach. College costs money, more money than we've ever seen. Our small savings account won't even cover the first semester. That night, long after everyone else is asleep, I go out to the garage. The air is cool and smells of concrete and old iron. I pull back a heavy canvas tarp. Underneath sits my only luxury, my only selfish dream. A Ezerkilent Zajat Vanyolk Ford Mustang. All black, all muscle. I'd bought the rusted-out shell for next to nothing and spent 3 years of nights and weekends bringing it back to life. I rebuilt the engine with my own hands. I did the bodywork myself, sanding for hours until it was perfectly smooth. Every chrome detail was scavenged from junkyards or ordered from catalogs. It was perfect. I promised Martha that one day, when the kids were grown, we'd get in that car and drive clear across the country, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. The next week, I placed an ad in the local paper. For sale, 1968 Ford Mustang. Mint condition, must sell. A few days later, a man in a crisp suit showed up. He smelled of cologne and money. He walked around the car, whistling softly in admiration. "This is one hell of a restoration," he said, running a hand along the car's fender. "A real labor of love." I just nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. He handed me a thick stack of cash. I counted it on the hood of my Mustang. It was enough for David's first year of tuition and his dorm fees. I signed the title over and gave him the keys. He got in, turned the ignition, and the deep, rumbling roar I loved so much sounded like a cry of betrayal. He backed out of my driveway and disappeared down the street. I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the lingering smell of its exhaust. When I went back inside, Martha knew. She didn't say a word. She just came over and wrapped her arms around me, her warm tears soaking the collar of my work shirt. "They'll appreciate it someday, Sam," she whispered into my shoulder. "When they're older, they'll understand." I told David I sold the car because it was getting too expensive to maintain. He just shrugged. "Probably a smart move, Dad. It was just an old clunker anyway." He didn't understand. He never asked, and Martha was wrong. He never did appreciate it. A bleak winter in 2010. Martha's been gone 5 years. Cancer took her in 6 short months, leaving a hollowed-out crater in our home and in my soul. I'm still living here, alone. Sarah is married now, to a good man named Mark. They want to buy their first house. They're full of hope. But the bank won't give them a mortgage without a substantial down payment they just don't have. They were sitting in this kitchen, looking lost and defeated. Sarah was crying softly. Mark was just staring at the table, his jaw tight. I looked at my daughter and saw Martha's eyes in her face. I couldn't stand to see her so unhappy. The next day I put on the suit I wore to Martha's funeral and went to the bank. I closed the savings account Martha and I had been feeding for 30 years. The rainy day fund, the Grand Canyon trip fund. I withdrew nearly every penny. The teller gave me a strange look, but didn't say anything. I brought the money to Sarah and Mark in a plain white envelope. "Here," I said, placing it on the table between them. "For your down payment." Sarah gasped. Her eyes went wide and then filled with tears of joy. She threw her arms around my neck. "Dad, how can we ever repay you? I swear we'll pay you back every dime." "There's nothing to repay," I said, patting her back. "Just be happy. That's all I want." They bought a nice little house with a blue door and a small yard for a garden, just like Sarah always wanted. For the first year or two, they'd have me over for barbecues. Then the invitations came less and less. They made new friends, developed new interests. With my calloused hands and my stories about the old days, I became a living reminder of where they came from. A reminder that didn't quite fit with their new, polished life. I sat there in the dark kitchen, the ghosts of 100 other sacrifices swirling around me, fixing David's bike, building Sarah's dollhouse, staying up all night by their beds when they were sick, giving them my last $20 for a prom dress. Each memory was another brick of my time, my energy, my health, my life, laid in the foundation of their success. I stood up and walked over to the old creaking dresser in the living room. In the bottom drawer, inside a dusty shoebox, was my entire life's accounting. For years, I had obsessively saved everything. Old receipts, bank statements, canceled checks, my worn-out work ledgers, where I'd written down every single job, every dollar earned. It was a lifetime of labor, documented on yellowed, brittle paper. I pulled out the box and dumped its contents onto the kitchen table. I didn't sleep. I sorted. I read. I remembered. I did the math. It was a bitter, painful accounting, the ledger of a forgotten sacrifice. And the longer I sat there, the clearer and uglier the picture became, a picture I had refused to see for years, fooling myself into believing it was all for love. I wasn't a father to them anymore. I was a resource, a dependable, inexhaustible utility they could tap into whenever they needed. And now that the resource was depleted, it was time to discard it, sell it off with the embarrassing old house and its specific atmosphere. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, the feeling inside me wasn't grief or self-pity. It was something else entirely. A cold, quiet, diamond-hard rage. The rage of a man who was about to have the last thing he owned, his dignity, stripped away from him. I carefully gathered the papers and put them back in the box. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Black, strong, and bitter. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I had been silent for 40 years. It was time to speak. A full week passed. A week of heavy charged silence. I waited. I didn't know for what exactly, but my gut, an instrument honed by decades of dealing with the unseen dangers of live electricity, told me this wasn't over. This was just a ceasefire. The real battle was yet to come. You can smell ozone in the air right before a lightning strike, and the air in my house felt thick with it. The call came on a Saturday morning. I was under the kitchen sink, wrestling with a leaky pipe, when the phone's sharp ring made me jump. The screen said, "David." I wiped my greasy hands on a rag and answered. His voice was unnaturally cheerful, the slick, friendly tone he used when he was about to close a deal. "Dad, hey, how are you feeling?" "Listen, Jessica and I were talking, and we've got a great idea. A really great proposition for you. How about we swing by around noon, and we can all talk?" "Swing on by," I said, my voice flat, and hung up. I knew exactly what his proposition was. The moment I had been subconsciously dreading had arrived. I didn't bother to clean up or change my shirt. I finished fixing the leak, washed the grease from my hands, poured myself a mug of coffee, and sat down in my armchair in the living room. And I waited. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, calm emptiness, and at its center, a steady blue flame of resolve. At high noon, the white SUV pulled into my driveway. The doors opened. David got out. Jessica got out. And they were followed by a third man. A stranger in a perfectly tailored gray suit, carrying an expensive leather briefcase, with a polished predatory smile plastered on his face. He looked like he'd just stepped out of an ad for a high-powered law firm. That was the final insult. They had brought a hired gun into my home, into my fortress, to pronounce my sentence. "Dad, this is Mr. Harris," David said, as they came inside. "He's our family attorney. He's just here to help us make sure everything is handled properly and by the book." I just nodded, not getting up. I looked from the lawyer to my son, then to my daughter-in-law. Jessica was pointedly avoiding my gaze, examining a crack in the ceiling with the intense interest of a home inspector. They arranged themselves on the sofa opposite me. The lawyer, Harris, placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with 2 sharp clicks. The performance was about to begin. "Sam," David started, looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "We're worried about you. You know that. No, this house. It's just too much for one person. It's old. It needs constant repairs. It's not safe for you at your age. So, we found a wonderful place for you. An assisted living community called the Golden Years over in Green Valley. You wouldn't believe this place, Dad. It's like a resort. Gourmet meals, 24/7 medical staff, a swimming pool, a library, social activities with people your own age. They don't have the smell of machine oil there, I bet," I said, my voice quiet but clear. David stopped short. "What did you say, Dad?" I said, "I'll bet your Golden Years resort doesn't smell like machine oil and strong coffee," I repeated, looking him straight in the eye for the first time. An awkward, heavy silence filled the room. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. The lawyer cleared his throat, taking charge. "Mr. Sam," he began, his voice smooth and soothing, the kind of voice a con man uses to sell swampland. "Your children want what's best for you. They are prepared to cover all the costs of your relocation and your ongoing care. The only thing we need from you is to sign a few papers to handle the formalities. Just a simple power of attorney to allow us to sell this property." With a practiced, fluid motion, he slid several documents across the coffee table toward me. I looked down at them. Official letterhead, dense paragraphs of fine print, and little yellow "sign here" stickers. They wanted me to sign away my life, my home, my land, my independence, willingly. "This property is worth a lot of money right now," Jessica couldn't help but add, her voice edged with impatience. "The market is hot. You could build a beautiful new house here, maybe a duplex. The money from the sale would pay for your new living arrangements for years. It's just the smart thing to do, Sam. The practical thing. Smart. Practical." Those were the words they used to justify their betrayal. This wasn't just snobbery anymore. This was a cold, calculated financial transaction. I sat there and looked at their faces as if seeing them for the first time. On David's face was a pathetic cocktail of shame, impatience, and greed. On Jessica's, pure, unadulterated avarice. She was already spending the money in her head. This was the second blow, and it was 100 times worse than the first. The first was a thoughtless jab, born of arrogance and ignorance. This was a planned execution, cold, clinical, and premeditated, and they had brought the executioner in his sharp suit to make sure it was all legal and tidy. And right then, something inside me finally snapped. Not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, decisive click, like a circuit breaker finally tripping after being overloaded for too long. 40 years of infinite patience had just run out. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I just slowly, deliberately, rose to my feet. I walked over to the old dresser, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out the dusty shoebox. I walked back to the coffee table and set it down in front of them with a solid, definitive thud. "What's that?" David asked, his voice a mix of confusion and alarm. "This, son," I said, lifting the lid, "is the real accounting, not the kind you do on a spreadsheet in your fancy office." I began to lay the brittle, yellowed papers out on the table, one by one. The college tuition bills, the stacks of pharmacy receipts, the bank statement showing the withdrawal of my life savings, my old, oil-stained work ledgers. Soon, the entire surface of the table was covered with the documented history of my sacrifice. "Before we discuss the sale of my house," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel, "we're going to discuss your debts. To me." David stared at the papers, his confusion turning to dawning horror. Jessica's smirk vanished. Even the professional shark, Mr. Harris, looked taken aback, his confident posture deflating slightly. The breaker had tripped. The point of no return was passed. In that moment, I was no longer a helpless victim. I was no longer a specific atmosphere. I was Samuel Allen, electrician, veteran, father, and I had come to collect. Not money, something far more valuable. And if I had to send them a bill to get it, then so be it. "So," I said, picking up the old calculator from the mantelpiece, "let's do the math." The air in the room became thick enough to cut with a knife. It was heavy, electric, and all the oxygen seemed to have been sucked out of it. The polite masks had fallen away. The business-like tones were gone. All that was left was the raw, undeniable truth, laid out on my old coffee table. I took my time. It was a ritual. I picked up each document, each faded receipt, and calmly, methodically, explained its significance. "This one here, David," I said, tapping a finger on a bill from his university's bursar's office, "is for your first semester's tuition, fall of 1993. To pay this exact amount, I sold my '68 Mustang. You might not remember it well, but I remember you calling it an old clunker. Well, this old clunker paid for this bill, and these," I gestured to a stack of other bills, "paid for the next 3 years. I paid for them by working 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, any job I could get." I looked my son directly in the eyes. The color drained from his face. He looked down at his expensive shoes. "And these, Sarah," I said, picking up a bundle of receipts held together by a rusty paperclip, "are for your asthma inhalers. 5 years' worth. Your mother and I used to drive to 3 different pharmacies sometimes, just to find them. And this stack," I pushed another pile forward, "is from your dance studio. You wanted so badly to take ballet. We couldn't afford it, so I took a night job, rewiring the motel out on the highway." Sarah, huddled on the couch, said nothing. I could see a deep blush of shame creeping up her neck, but her shame no longer moved me. "And this," I said, placing the final document on top of the pile like a trump card, "this is the crown jewel, a bank statement, January 12th, 2010, a withdrawal for nearly our entire life's savings. The down payment for your house, Sarah, for your blue door and your garden. Your mother and I were saving that money to see the Grand Canyon. We were supposed to go after I retired, but you needed a house. I chose you." I picked up my old calculator. The click of the plastic buttons was abnormally loud in the dead silence of the room. I punched in the numbers, one by one, coldly, impersonally. "I'm not going to add interest for all those years," I said when I was done, my voice level. "Though, by any law of fairness, I should. I'm not going to bill you for my time, for my lost sleep, for the toll it took on my body. I'm only going to count what's written down right here. The cold, hard facts." I turned the calculator around and showed them the screen. A 6-figure number glowed on the dim LCD display. The lawyer, Harris, was the first to find his voice, trying to regain his footing. "Listen, Mr. Allen, this is all very admirable, of course. But legally speaking, these were gifts. It was your parental duty. You have no legal claim to this money." "Really?" A dry, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. "Parental duty? That's a hell of a thing. And where was your filial duty? Your children's duty? When you decided to throw me out of my home because you don't like the smell? Where was your duty when you were plotting behind my back how to cash in on my land? I fulfilled my duty, Mr. Harris, over and over again. Now, it's their turn to settle their accounts." I looked at David again. "You want to sell this house? I heard you. Fine, I agree. On one condition. From the proceeds of the sale, this amount," I tapped the calculator, "gets paid back to me. First, to the penny. You can have whatever's left over, and after that, we never have to see each other again." Jessica gasped, as if she'd been slapped. "That's robbery. That's blackmail. You have no right." "Right?" My voice, for the first time, rose to a roar that seemed to shake the little house. "You dare to talk to me about rights in the house I built with my own 2 hands? On the land I bought with money I earned with my own blood and sweat? Your entire life, your fancy cars, your vacations, your house. None of that is your right. It was my sacrifice, a sacrifice you were all too happy to forget." I sank back into my armchair. The rage flowed through me like a current, but on the outside, I was calm. The weight that had been crushing my chest for years was suddenly gone. I straightened my back. I was no longer a beggar in my own home. I was the creditor. "So," I said, addressing the stunned lawyer, "you have a choice. You can either draw up a new document right now, a loan agreement, for this amount, with a payment schedule, or you can draw up an agreement for the disbursement of funds from the sale of the house, with my debt listed as the priority lien. You have 10 minutes to discuss it among yourselves, on my back porch, and then I want you out of my house." They stood up as if pulled by strings, dazed, angry, confused. David, Jessica, and their well-dressed attack dog. I could hear their muffled, furious whispers from the porch. They had walked in here as hunters, confident and in control, and now they were the ones caught in a trap. This was my turning point. The moment I stopped being a footnote in their lives and became a force to be reckoned with. I didn't really want their money. Deep down, I knew I'd probably never see a dime of it. What I wanted, I had just taken back. My voice, my power, my self-respect. I was no longer a specific atmosphere. I was Samuel Allen again. 10 minutes later, they filed back inside. David's face was gray as ash. Jessica was flushed with rage. The lawyer looked like he'd just been forced to swallow his own briefcase. We need to think about this," David mumbled. "You do that," I said. "You think all you want. You know my terms. Now the door is over there." I pointed. They left. In silence, like a defeated army in retreat. I watched until their shiny white SUV disappeared around the bend, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust. I was alone again, in my house, with my smell of oil and coffee. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. Absolutely, gloriously free. I walked to the table, gathered my life's paperwork, and carefully placed it back in its box. It was no longer an archive of pain. It was my arsenal, and I had just fired my first shot. The days that followed were quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence of before. It was a silence filled with possibility, the calm after a storm. The phone didn't ring. I knew they were out there somewhere, arguing, scheming, talking to their lawyer. But for the first time, I didn't care. The wall was down, I was on the other side, and I was busy. I started with a good spring cleaning, but not the kind Jessica had in mind. I had no intention of purifying the atmosphere. I did the opposite. I threw open the big doors of my garage, letting the sunlight flood the dusty space. I rolled my old workbench out into the yard. I took the engine of my ancient lawnmower completely apart, cleaned the carburetor, and replaced the spark plug. The sharp, intoxicating smell of gasoline and oil mixed with the sweet scent of the roses Martha had planted by the fence years ago. That smell, that was the smell of freedom. I gathered up all the birthday gifts. The cashmere blanket went to a local homeless shelter. I gave the digital blood pressure cuff to my neighbor Bill, an old Korean war vet whose pressure was always acting up. As for the big fancy box from the ionic air purifier, I set it up on a stump at the back of my property and used it for target practice with my old pellet gun. The quiet thwack of the pellet hitting the glossy cardboard was one of the most satisfying sounds I'd ever heard. A week later, the phone finally rang. It was Sarah. She was crying. "Dad, why are you doing this? Why are you destroying our family?" "A family doesn't try to kick an old man out of his home to sell the land, Sarah," I said, my voice calm. It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. "But David said you're demanding an insane amount of money. He said you've gone crazy." "I'm not demanding anything, sweetheart," I said. I just sent an invoice for services rendered. There's a difference. For 40 years, I invested in you. Now, I'm investing in myself. That's all. I hung up. I didn't feel pity. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. The next day, the lawyer, Mr. Harris, called. His voice had lost its smooth, confident tone. He sounded tired and annoyed. Mr. Allen, my client, David Allen, has authorized me to inform you that he is withdrawing his offer to assist with your relocation. He wishes to forget this entire unfortunate incident. He proposes we go back to the way things were. The way things were is over, Mr. Harris, I said, picturing his sour face. You tell your client that I haven't forgotten a thing, and the invoice is still open. I'm in no hurry. I've got nothing but time. I began a new life. At 70 years old, I dug through an old closet and found the dusty, rolled-up plans for a small, flat-bottomed fishing boat I had always dreamed of building. I took some of my pension money and bought a load of fine pine lumber. Every day I was out in my garage, and the sound of my saw and plane became the new music of the house. The smell of fresh sawdust, pine, and resin was the smell of a future. My hands, which I thought were only good for fixing things for other people, felt strong and sure again, creating something for me. My old friends started stopping by again. Bill from next door. Tom, a retired trucker with a laugh like a diesel engine, would bring a thermos of coffee. They'd pull up an old crate in the garage and just watch me work. They didn't ask questions about my family. They were men of my generation. They understood everything without it having to be said. And in their eyes, I saw not pity, but a simple, quiet respect. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the showdown, I was on the back porch, planing a long board for the boat's hull. A car I didn't recognize pulled up. It was a beat-up sedan, not a fancy SUV. David got out, alone. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a plain t-shirt and jeans. He looked tired. He looked 10 years older. He stood by the gate for a long moment, then walked slowly toward me. "Can I?" he asked, nodding toward the empty crate next to me. I just nodded and kept working. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the rhythmic shh of my plane shaving thin curls from the wood. "I really screwed up, didn't I?" he finally said, his voice low and hoarse. "Yep," I answered. "Jessica filed for divorce," he said, staring off at the trees. "She said I was weak, said I couldn't handle the situation with you, said she didn't sign up to be married to a failure who couldn't provide the lifestyle she was accustomed to. I didn't say anything. That wasn't my fight. I've been thinking about what you said." He swallowed hard. "Those papers, I called the college. I had them send me my old tuition records. I never knew, Dad. I swear to God, I never knew. I was just a kid. I thought it was easy. I thought the money was just there." "Money is never just there, son," I said, not looking up from my work. "Someone always has to earn it. With their back, with their time, with their life." He sat there for another 20 minutes, lost in thought. Then he stood up. Can I help with anything?" he asked, gesturing toward the boat's frame. I looked at his hands, soft, pale hands that had spent their life on keyboards. "Hold the other end of this plank," I said. He walked over and took the end of the long board, his grip uncertain but firm. I drew my plane across the wood again, and a perfect, fragrant curl of pine fell across his shoe. I hadn't forgiven him. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't a switch you can flip. It's a long road, and I didn't know if we'd ever reach the end of it. But in that moment, On my back porch, surrounded by the smell of sawdust, oil, and coffee, something had shifted. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for absolution. He was just holding the other end of the board. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. A first payment on a debt that could never truly be repaid. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll finish this boat and spend my days out on the lake, fishing and watching the sunset. Maybe David will keep coming around on Saturdays, and we'll work in silence in the garage. Maybe Sarah will find the courage to come by herself one day, just to talk. But I know one thing for damn sure. I will never again let anyone tell me how my house is supposed to smell. My house smells like my life. An honest life. A hard life. And now, finally, a free life. And I wouldn't trade that smell for all the golden years in the world. I sit in my rocking chair. I drink my coffee, and the familiar creak of the floorboards is no longer the sound of loneliness. It's the sound of a quiet victory. My own. And that's more than enough.